Good evening and welcome to Newsmax Prime. I'm J.D. Hayworth. Of prime interest tonight, Mr. Trump goes to Washington. The president-elect sits down with the incumbent, then heads up Capitol Hill. The way I see it, Donald Trump knows where he wants to go, both literally and figuratively. Today's visits were part courtesy calls, part planning sessions. Most of the planning went on with the House and Senate leadership, while caution and courtesy came in abundance at a very correct meeting at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Meantime, the chastened cheerleaders of the left, found at the alphabet networks and their cable cousins, have rediscovered courtesy in one sense, but still abandoned caution in another. First, the courtesy. Progressives are admitting tonight that they've been less than polite to working men and women. So now the elites on the left are rethinking their constant catcalls toward middle-class Trump supporters, who they accused of being racists right through Election Day. Now they say they will respect the perspective of everyday Americans, even as they work to change it. But one thing that has not changed, the expectation in the press that, again, Republicans must change their governing priorities. Whoever wins or loses, it is the constant refrain from the left. 8 years ago, when Mr. Obama won, Republicans would have to reconsider their convictions, bow to convenience, and understand it was their job to aid the new president. Today, despite Donald Trump's triumph, those leftist prostitutes are added again. And once again, it's the Republicans who should change. Never mind the verdict of the voters. The imperative is that Republicans reconcile with the political left and the Washington press corps, invalidate their victory, and accept the ultimate wisdom of the Washington elites. What never occurs to this snob set is the notion that they should understand the onus is on them. They lost, Trump won. So, since words will not convince them, maybe this scene will. Donald Trump, now the president-elect, in the Oval Office with a man he will succeed on January 20th. Ask not how Republicans will compromise with you leftists. Ask how you will compromise with Republicans. And that's the way I see it. For more on what happened today at the White House, we're pleased to be joined by Newsmax chief political columnist and White House correspondent John Gizzi. John joins us tonight from Newsmax Washington, but adorned in his fedora, it appears he's out front of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Such is the magic of television. John, the current president and the president-elect met earlier today. Then both came out and spoke to the press and, by extension, to the American people. Here's some of what they had to say.
I believe that it is important for all of us, regardless of party and regardless of political preferences, to now come together, work together, to deal with the many challenges that we face.
Well, thank you very much, President Obama. This was a meeting that was going to last for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and we were just going to get to know each other. We had never met each other. I have great respect.
Donald Trump, the president-elect, very conciliatory, and more than one person, Brother Gizzi, has said, oh, to be a fly on the White House wall. Now, with your superior knowledge and instincts of politics and governance, what have you heard, what have you divined from these two leaders getting together? In other words, John, how did it go?
It went over very well, and let me add, J.D., that throughout the fall campaign, there have been a lot of empty seats in that White House press room. But when I was there today, it was jammed and truly a standing room only room with correspondents from as far away as Russia and France. Look, the president-elect had a good meeting today, very convivial, and they got along well. And this is just part of a process that Barack Obama began yesterday when his press secretary, Josh Earnest, told us he wants to see President-elect Trump succeed when he takes office and would do everything to have a smooth transition. Well, he started to make good on his word.
And so you believe the meeting was both substantive as well as symbolic?
I think it was substantive in the sense they probably needled each other a little bit about things. It is their first at-length meeting ever, by the way. The only other time I believe the two of them have met, and it was in passing, was the White House Correspondents' Dinner a few years back when President Obama used Donald Trump and his hair as a foil. I have a funny feeling he didn't relive that today.
And some speculate that is one of the reasons that Mr. Trump finally decided to run for president. We'll leave that for just a second and instead go to the rest of the itinerary for the president-elect as he left the White House, then went to the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, meeting with some of my old colleagues on Capitol Hill in the Congress. What have you heard about that meeting, John?
Very productive meeting. Remember, he and Paul Ryan have not always seen eye to eye, but with Vice President-elect Mike Pence acting as the honest broker between the President-elect and his old comrade in arms, Speaker Ryan, the meeting was, in Ryan's words, fantastic. In terms of policy, I'm not sure what the details were, but very soon I think you're going to see all talk of a challenge to Paul Ryan for Speaker when the House Republican Conference meets Wednesday over. It will be a love fest, and that's what happens when you tend to win elections across the board.
Yes, winning is the great salve. It helps to solve everything. We have some problems to solve as a nation. Will this new president and his Republican Congress get that job done fairly early, at least tackling some of these things in the first 100 days, in your opinion?
Presidents who succeed usually move quickly when they appear to have public support behind them and an aura of bipartisanship. Franklin Roosevelt did it in his first 100 days in 1933. Ronald Reagan did it when he secured passage of the Budget and Tax Acts of 1981, and I might add, took time off to recover from an assassin's bullet then as well. Donald Trump certainly is aware of this and has people around him. So I think, yes, he will move very quickly to have a memorable 100 days of his own.
Brother Gizzi, you have given us a memorable column yesterday writing at Newsmax.com about you've become the great mentioner. Who might end up in the Trump cabinet? Let's take a look at some of the names you put forth, and we'll put them up on the screen. You say that either Newt Gingrich or former UN Ambassador John Bolton might end up as Secretary of State. For Secretary of Defense, General Michael Flynn. Over at Homeland Security, Senator Jeff Sessions. Secretary of Education, Dr. Ben Carson. And the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Betsy McCoy. Continuing down this list, take a look at some of the other names. Rudy Giuliani, Attorney General. White House Chief of Staff, Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. White House Press Secretary, Laura Ingraham. White House Counsel, Joseph Schmitz. And the RNC chair, kind of like part of the political kitchen cabinet, Roger Stone. You have certainly come up with some interesting selections. What motivated you to put those names on paper and share them with your reading public?
Well, look, JD, if you knew everything that went into me developing a story, you'd know how I do my job. But you know in Washington, because I certainly covered you in Congress, that a good reporter gets disparate names and reasons that they are being mentioned from disparate sources here in town. Now, very few people who are around the president-elect talk, but certainly those who were involved in the Republican effort this year know very well. Newt Gingrich, for example, has been one of the earliest and closest supporters of Donald Trump back to when he was just seeking the Republican nomination. And he was able to bring in many others in the Washington establishment, former Congressman Bob Livingston, the Appropriations Committee chairman, for example, onto the Trump train. Someone like that is a natural to be Secretary of State, and he would probably be in the position that the then Tennessee Senator Cordell Hull was to President-elect Franklin Roosevelt when he made him Secretary of State in 1933.
Just one other note from the here and now, John Gizzi. Governor Chris Christie, helping with the transition, but with Bridgegate swirling around him, is there any other role for him possibly in Washington with the Trump team?
I don't know about Washington, but even if he's not selected for a cabinet, and the president-elect does have to be careful about confirmation fights in a Senate that's going to be divided 52-48 in favor of the Republicans, Governor Christie might be better advised to serve as a gray eminence, an advisor behind the scenes, whom the new president likes and calls on for advice. Someone the way Vernon Jordan was to former President Bill Clinton.
Well, John Gizzi, we appreciate you giving us a peek behind the scenes and putting forth some names. We'll see what transpires. Thanks for your time tonight from Newsmax Washington. As Brother Gizzi just mentioned, I have known him for over a quarter century, and I will tell you, there is no more perceptive Washington observer than John Gizzi. However, he's being the great mentioner, and this whole process of selecting a cabinet does not occur in a vacuum. Some selections, while honored, will decide it's not for them. Others might have a tough time getting through the Senate. Nevertheless, John Gizzi has offered an interesting list. We'll see who shows up from his list on Mr. Trump's cabinet. Now, still to come, what role did evangelicals play in helping Mr. Trump get elected? Miranda Kahn looks into that. Plus, Michael Reagan and Margaret Howell join us when Newsmax Prime continues.